Hey guys, it's AJ. Welcome back to another video. Hope you're doing good. So we have not yet implemented an enemy. Of course, we have this punching bag, but that doesn't do anything. So in this video, we are gonna start with the basics of setting up an enemy. And here we are gonna try a different method. We're gonna have a game object which is static, like this puddle of water, to have all the enemies and all the players, a list of all the enemies and players, and then from that list we are going to make the enemy target a player when the player is in range with the enemy, and then we are going to make the enemy look at the player. So that's what we're going to be doing in this video, and in the next series of videos we are going to make the enemy chase the player, attack the player, everything. So bear with me for a little while until we get this enemy up and running. So without further ado, let's get started. So guys, we are going to be using this character as the enemy for now. So I'm just going to drag it and drop it onto the scene. Let's rename it as enemy 1, and let's right click, unpack prefab completely. Then let's say we go to the prefabs folder, enemy, and here let's drop it here. Maybe we should move this enemy up a little bit. Let's add a capsule collider. Let's add a rigid body, and in the rigid body I'm gonna freeze the rotation on all 3 axes, and let's add a health script. So the start health is set to 100. We can use that, and let's hit override, apply all, and we don't really have a animator controller for this enemy's animator. Let's just be empty for now, and I'm just gonna go to the game manager. So I believe this is the character, so we can go to the capsule collider, copy component, and paste component values so that we get the correct values for the capsule collider of the enemy. I mean, we already set it up for when we were creating this character, so we don't need to do it again. So I just copied that, and maybe let's duplicate this enemy a couple of times, and let's have one here, and let's have another over here. Okay, maybe one more time, let's have another one here. So yeah, now we are gonna go to scripts folder, and here we have the core folder. So here I'm just gonna create a new script, and I'm just gonna call it characters. Hit enter, and I'm gonna attach it to this puddle of water that we have, and actually you can attach it to anything that is static on the screen. That's what I'm trying to get here, and I'm gonna go to the scripts folder, add a new folder. Let's call this enemy, and I'm gonna add another C# script. Let's call this enemy controller. Now let's attach the enemy controller to the enemy prefab. Okay, now let's open the characters script and edit it. So guys, in the characters script, we are gonna have 2 lists, one for all the enemies and one for all the playable characters. Right now we just using one character at a time, but I am gonna try to make this a multiplayer game, so we need a list for all the player characters, and in the future we might even add NPCs. So we would add on another list for NPCs, but right now I'm just going to have two. And we are going to use the player controller for getting all the players, because player controller is a script which is going to be on all the players. And we are going to use enemy controller to get all the enemies. Let's just copy this, paste it here, and make it enemy controller. Now in the update, we are going to say players equal to get all players, and enemies equal to get all enemies. Now let's hit Alt Enter and generate method. Same for get all enemies. Alt Enter, generate method. So we can delete this, throw new now implemented exception. Now here in the enemy get all enemies method, we are gonna create another list, another temporary list. So let's call it 10. Then we are gonna use a for each loop. And we're gonna say enemy controller, let's call it EC, in find objects of type enemy controller. So we're going to be iterating through all the game objects having enemy controller as a component. And we are gonna just add all the enemies having health greater than 0. So if an enemy has 0 health, we think of it as a dead enemy and we don't want it in our list. So if ec dot get component health, and in the health script, we got a method called get health factor, which is gonna give health points divided by max health point. And if our health point is 0, we are gonna say that we don't want to add this character to our list. So let's say get health factor greater than 0, then we add it to the temporary list. Now after this, we are just going to return the temporary list, so that enemies will have all the enemies we had in this list. And we are just going to do the same thing for players. So here we are going to replace enemy controller with player controller, and that's pretty much it. And let's call this PC for player controller. Yeah, that's pretty much it for getting all the enemies and players in our list. Now in the update, we are gonna use for each to iterate through all the enemies. So let's say enemy controller, enemy in enemies, Then what we want to do is we want to find the nearest player or the nearest target that this particular enemy has, and set it up in the enemy controller script on that enemy. So let's move to the enemy controller for now and set some fields in it. So here in the enemy controller, we are going to have a field called the player controller of type player controller to have the nearest targeted player, or the nearest, or just the nearest player. So let's call it nearest. Let's just call it nearest target, because we might want to add NPCs. Then NPCs are not going to be players. So we want the enemy to target both the players and the NPCs. In that case, it's better to call it target. So let's say nearest target, and let's set it to null. Then we are going to have a float, and this is going to be the chase distance. So when the player or an NPC comes within this distance of the enemy is going to chase them. So chase distance, let's set it to 5 as a default. And let's say we have another boolean variable to check if the enemy has locked on to this target, because we don't want the enemy locking on to multiple targets at the same time, because they are in contact. I mean, they are in the chasing distance of the enemy. So let's call this target locked. So what I'm gonna do with this field is, if a enemy is targeting a player, then we are not gonna send in a new nearest enemy if another enemy comes within the range of the, if another player comes in range of the enemy, because in that case the enemy is gonna be confused. We are gonna wait for a short distance. When the enemy has locked on to a target, then after this time has worn off, we are gonna check if the player or the NPC that the enemy was targeting is still in reach of the enemy. If it is in reach, then we are gonna lock on to that same target. Otherwise, we are gonna make the enemy find a new nearest target, or go back to his original position, something like that, if he doesn't find a nearest target within range. So initially, I'm just gonna set it to false as a default, and here we are gonna have a public method, and it's just gonna be sending back target lock, so that our character script is gonna know if this particular enemy has a locked target or not. Now we are gonna have another method to update the nearest target. So public void update nearest target, and we are gonna be sending in a player controller nearest target, and we are gonna set this dot nearest target equal to nearest target. Now if we go to the characters script again, here we can set up a enemy controller called EC, and EC is gonna be equal to enemy dot get component enemy controller. Oh, actually, I don't think we need to do this. Let's just try it out with enemy alone. So here we are going to check if enemy dot is target locked. So if the enemy has no target locked on, then we are going to say enemy dot update nearest target and pass in a target. So for that, we are going to use another method. Let's call this find nearest target and send in the enemy. Now let's hit alt enter, generate method. So here in the find nearest target, we are going to have a float, and this is going to be the minimum distance between a player and this enemy. So let's set it to map f dot infinity. Let's add a player controller. Let's call this nearest player and set it to null. Now we are gonna go through all the players in this list players and check which one is nearest to this particular enemy. Then we are gonna need another method here to find the distance between this player and this particular enemy. So we are gonna call this find distance, and let's send in enemy and player, and as always let's hit alt and generate method, and here we just gotta return vector3 dot distance enemy dot transform dot position comma player dot transform dot position. So we get the distance between this particular player and this particular enemy. Now we are going to compare it with our minimum distance. So if min distance is greater than this distance, then we are going to say nearest player is this player. So nearest player equal to player, and we are going to reset the minimum distance to this distance. Now in the end, we are just going to return the nearest player. So what actually happens here is first the minimum distance is going to be infinity. So when it comes here in the for each the player, we are going to calculate the distance, and this distance is going to be set as the minimum distance. Then the next round when it comes, it is going to again check the distance of this particular enemy with the new player. So we get a new distance. We are going to check if that distance is less than the distance we had from the earlier player, and if it is less, then that's going to be the new minimum distance. So we are going to loop through all the players like this and get the nearest player and send it back to this method. So this method is going to go to enemy controller, update the nearest enemy, update the nearest target for the enemy. And when it does that, we are gonna call a coroutine to lock on to the target after checking if it is within the range of the enemy or within the chasing distance of the enemy. So let's say I enumerate lock target now. We are gonna have another method over here to check if the target is within the chasing distance of the enemy. So I'm just gonna call it is in range, and here we just gotta return vector 3 dot distance between transform dot position, because that's the enemy, and nearest target dot transform dot position, that is the target we got from our character script, which is nearest to this enemy, and we're just gonna check if it is less than or equal to the chase distance and return that. So if it is in range, we are gonna say target locked is true. We are gonna set the target lock to be true. So target lock using the ternary operator is in range question mark true if the target is in range, else we are going to set it to false. Then we are going to wait for a few seconds. So let's say we wait for 5. Then we are going to call this coroutine again. Let's rename it as low ck lock target. And let's just do another thing. If target logged, let's say we look at the enemy. I mean, look at the target, because this is the enemy. Okay. Let's also just have another check here. If the nearest target dot get component health dot get health factor greater than 0, just to be sure that the enemy is not attacking my red player. It's still gonna work without this, I guess, because we already checked it in here when we added the players to the list. But just to be safe, I'm just gonna add this one line of code here as well. Now let's go to Unity, hit play, and see if this works out. So guys, we got the character over here, and if we check the enemy one, the target is locked in, so this enemy is already looking at the player. So if we move around, it's still gonna look at this player because the player is locked in. And if we go to the water, we are gonna see a list of all the players. So this is the only player which is active right now, that's why we have that. And if we check enemies, we got all 4 enemies over here. Now I'm just gonna try moving away from this enemy, and if we check here, still, yeah, the target locked is off. Now let's say we move towards another enemy and see if the target lock gets back. Target lock becomes true. Okay, yeah. So now we get in range with this enemy. The target locked is going to be set to true, and this enemy is going to look at the player with that creepy smile. So that's pretty cool, working fine, and it would work for. It should work for all the enemies because they're basically the same game object cloned. So yeah, same prefab. So guys, that's it for today's video. Thank you for watching. Hope you liked it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. In the next few videos, we are going to be setting up an animator controller for the enemy. We are going to make the enemy chase the player and maybe attack the player when it comes within attacking range. We are going to set up an attacking range for the enemy, and the enemy is going to lose track of the player once the player has gone out of the range of the enemy. Actually, we are kind of already doing that, but we are going to make sure that we do it even when the enemy chases the player. And we are also going to set up a patrolling path for the enemy, or even a random patrolling path for the enemy. So that's all good stuff to look forward to. So go ahead and subscribe to my channel if you have not already. That would really be helpful. Until next time, see ya, bye.